Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Gretchen, and today I want to take a couple minutes to talk about How to Say Babylon by Safiya Sinclair. Now, normally I would wait and include this book as part of my February wrap-up, but since I finished it, it just so happened to be longlisted for the inaugural Women's Prize for Nonfiction. And anytime I have a book prize that I'm following, if I'm reading any of the books, I always like to do individual videos for them, just so that I can take a little more time to talk about them and dig a little deeper, as opposed to just taking a little bit of time in a wrap-up. And the more I thought about it, this book definitely deserves to have a little bit longer of a conversation because it is absolutely exquisite. It's an amazing memoir, and if you're a reader that doesn't typically like to read memoirs, or even if you're one that does, I hope that I can convince you to pick this one up. So the initial reason why this book was one that I was drawn to is it is written by Safiya Sinclair, who is a poet by trade. So anytime we're dealing with a poet that is writing a book, I always get excited because you know that the writing is going to be lush, you know that it's going to be dense and beautiful. And the second reason is that once I learned a little bit about Safiya and her upbringing, I realized that it is about a religion and a culture that I knew little to nothing about, which is Rastafari. And I thought that this just sounded so fascinating. Me not knowing anything about that world was immediately appealing to me because I knew that not only was I going to hear someone's life story and have it be written beautifully, I was going to also learn about things that are going on in the world and a new religion to me and a new culture. So anytime I can learn from a book, that's a win-win for me. So one other thing that I will say before I get too much into this book is that I know that oftentimes when we get on our channels and we talk about books that we really enjoy, we tend to be a little hyperbolic, because we're oftentimes talking about the books very shortly after we have read them, and we are still excited about them and a little bit of time has passed. But I will say it's been about 3 weeks, I think, since I finished this book, and the more that I think about it, the more I am convincing myself that this is hands down the best memoir that I think I have ever had the privilege of reading. And I say privilege of reading because this memoir was so powerful to me, because Safiya Sinclair's father, who is a major player within this book, is still alive. And she is telling her story, which does not paint her father and sometimes her mother in the best light, but they are still with us. And for me, that is the bravest thing that an author can do, to put their self on the line, putting their work and their art out into the world, knowing that it could potentially ruin relationships, it could burn bridges, it could be life-changing in a good way, but it could be life-changing in a horrible way. And I am so thankful that Safiya Sinclair decided that this was the right time to get her story out into the world, and she didn't sit on it until she got to that point in her life where she felt more comfortable about exposing everything that she went through throughout her childhood. So I do think that this is a privileged read, and if you have any interest in reading a book like that, then this is definitely going to be one that I highly recommend you getting to. Now, I mentioned that this story of Safiya's follows or ties deeply into the Rastafarian culture. So the story basically starts with her telling her experience of being a child living in Jamaica with her siblings, as well as giving us a little bit of backstory about her mother and her father. And toward the beginning of her telling her story, we learn that her father is of the Rastafarian religion, and at the start, he is a practicing Rastafarian. It's a part of his life, but it does not consume his life. And then the longer that her story goes on, the more radicalized he gets, and the more it becomes his identity, and the more his identity also taints the family, and he sets his expectations for the family, and basically his beliefs build a prison around the entirety of his family, and that includes Safiya. And we learn about her happy times, we learn about her not so happy times. And I think that that's a good thing about this book, is there's a lot of balance. Like, although there are terrible things that happen within her story and her life, she doesn't just focus on all of the atrocities. She does talk about the good times and the happy times. So it's not just doom and gloom the entirety of the memoir. There are parts of it where you will be laughing, where you're cheering for her, where you're proud of her and her siblings, and you're touched by the relationship that she has with both her mother and her father. But then as her father's radicalization continues, her life starts to get more and more dark and bleak, and the more trapped she becomes. And the fact that she is super intelligent, she is such a smart woman, it became very evident that her coming from poor means in Jamaica, that her ticket out of everything was going to be an education, and her getting exposed to an education and ultimately getting to a point where she can get out on her own and not be under the rule of her father. So Safiya talks a lot about her journey of getting her education and how important that was to her. And I found those parts of the memoir very, very inspiring, knowing her situation and all that was going on in her life. For her to be able to rise above all of that and come out on not only like on top, but at the top. She was like literally at one point in time the top student in all of Jamaica. She worked so hard, and she had such passion for getting out. She had this fire in her, and you know, come hell or high water, she was going to get out and come out on the other side. And unfortunately, even though she was able to get there, her life was so filled with heartache, disappointment, abuse. And for her to be able to talk about those things in such a beautiful way, even though they were so devastating and tragic, was just, I was astounded while I was reading this book. There were parts where I literally don't know how she did it. She would say the most brutal things. She would say these things that happened to her, and as the reader you're like, oh my god, like this is awful. But then like I would stop and I would say, that is some, like the way that she said it, that is the most beautiful way I have ever heard somebody talk about how they were abused. I was just in shock and awe the entire time reading this book. I loved that this book was raw. She did not hold anything back. And that goes back to me saying what a privilege it is to read the story, because she was not afraid to hold back all of those things, knowing that the people that did these things to her are still around and are going to likely pick up this book and read it, and that takes some guts to do. And she did it in such a respectful way. She did it in a way that is way more respectful than the people in her life ever treated her. Also, just goes to show you what a decent person Safiya Sinclair seems to be, that she can rise above all of that, and instead of tearing the people down in her life that tried to keep her down, she rose above it. And although she got her story out, she did it in a very, very respectful way. And it was such a phenomenal read. This is one that I don't think that I'm going to ever be able to forget about, knowing the things that she went through, knowing that there are women out there that are going through those same things, or that did go through those same things, that will never have such a platform or opportunity to get their stories out into the world. I think that she did a wonderful thing by getting this story out there. And I also think the fact that she is a poet, and she is a known poet, that learning more about the poet and what fuels their writing and what fuels their art, I think is really powerful. And I say that because sometimes I will read something that is really poignant and touching and sad, and it's coming from a writer, and you almost want to say, like, who hurt you? Like, how can you come up with something like this? You have to have had something horrible happen to you in your life for you to be able to come up with something like this. And I think that I really appreciate that if we look at Safiya's poetry and we now know what she has gone through in her life, it makes me appreciate her poetry even more, because I have insight to where that pain and hope and all of those things that she conveys through her poetry, we know where it's coming from. And I just think that that's amazing. I am so glad that I got a chance to read this book. I am over the moon happy for her that she was longlisted, and I certainly hope that she gets shortlisted, and I could certainly see this being a true contender for the winner. I don't know if they're going to choose a memoir. There's a lot of great nonfiction picks that are on the list that are more historical or, you know, based on current events and things like that. I don't know if the inaugural prize will go to a memoir, but the fact that she has been honored with this is wonderful for her. And I selfishly have a wish that maybe Safiya will maybe dabble into some fiction. Like, I'm throwing that out to the universe. I know she's not watching this video or listening, but I would love to see what she could do with the novel. And I'm sure that she could tap into other life experience and come up with a great fictional story, or maybe like, you know, semi-autobiographical. I don't know. But I just know I cannot wait to see what else she can put out into the world. Fingers crossed, like I said, she at least gets shortlisted. I would love to see her win, but I just don't know what type of book they want on the Women's Prize, because this is an inaugural award. But yeah, we'll see what happens, and until we read again, bye.